One impulsive step onto a dance floor was all it took to permanently fracture the careful ordinary life Celeste Novak had spent 24 years constructing. She thought she was pulling a stranger out of danger. She grabbed his arm without asking permission, without knowing his name, without the faintest idea that the man whose sleeve she yanked was the most feared crime lord between Lake Michigan and the Mississippi River. The Great Hall of the Art Institute of Chicago blazed with the kind of money that doesn't announce itself. No garish displays, no bottle service peacocking. Just $500 floral arrangements, a string quartet playing Vivaldi in the corner, and a room full of people who'd bought their tax exemptions by attending tonight's charity auction for pediatric research. Celeste moved through them like water, through stone, invisible in her black uniform shirt and pencil skirt, balancing a silver tray of sparkling water and champagne flutes. She'd pulled this shift from an agency that staffed high-end events. The hourly rate was nearly double what she made at the hospital cafe where she worked her other job, and with her mother's last round of immunotherapy running into the tens of thousands, she couldn't afford to say no. She was 24, a junior nursing student at Northwestern's Feinberg School of Medicine, permanently exhausted and better at hiding it than almost anything else. By 10 o'clock, the auction was winding down and the open bar had been working its loosening effect on the donors. Celeste was refilling the champagne station near the East Colonnade when she saw them. Two men who didn't belong. Not because they weren't dressed for it, they wore tuxedos, correctly fitted, no visible tells. But Celeste's mother had crossed the border from Sonora when Celeste was 3. She'd grown up in Pilsen, where you learned early to read the difference between men who wore nice clothes and men who wore nice clothes as camouflage. These two had the shoulders, the careful stillness, and the eyes that never stopped moving. Street muscle in evening wear. They were converging on a single man seated alone at a high table near the far colonnade. He sat apart from the crowd with the kind of stillness that felt almost aggressive, dark-haired, jaw sharp enough to cut, in a black Tom Ford tuxedo that hadn't come off a rack. A glass of neat scotch sat at his elbow untouched. He was watching the room the way you watch something you own, not admiring it, just confirming it was still there. The two men split as they approached, flanking him from either side. One of them said something into the seated man's ear. Celeste watched his jaw tighten, a barely perceptible shift visible only because she was already staring. His right hand moved to his thigh under the table. Celeste had done 2 clinical rotations in the ER at Stroger Hospital. She knew what a man reaching for something he shouldn't have looked like. Oh, God. Her body moved before her brain finished the calculation. She set her tray down on the nearest surface, a Monet hanging on the wall. She'd feel terrible about that later, and walked. Not ran, because running would draw attention, and attention was exactly what she needed to control, not cause. She crossed the marble floor in her sensible flats, heart hammering against her sternum, and did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed his arm. "There you are," Celeste said, loud enough to carry, pitching her voice into the register of mildly exasperated girlfriend. "I have been standing by the Calder sculpture for 20 minutes. The man turned to look at her. His eyes were the color of deep water, dark, opaque, giving nothing. For a single terrifying second he said nothing at all. The two men in tuxedos had gone very still. Celeste didn't give herself time to reconsider. She tightened her grip on his arm and added the detail that would either save them or ruin everything. "You promised me a dance. The quartet's been playing for the last 10 minutes and you're just sitting here, and I am not doing this again, Kieran." She'd invented the name on the spot. It landed in the air between them. And the man stood up. He rose to his full height, which was considerably more than she'd estimated from across the hall, and looked down at Celeste with an expression she couldn't fully read, something between surprise and dark, calculating amusement. "You're right," he said, his voice low. "I lost track of time." He offered his arm and Celeste took it, and they walked to the small parquet section, that served as a dance floor, leaving the two men standing at the table with no target and no cover for why they were there. The quartet was playing something Celeste didn't recognize. It didn't matter. She was close enough to feel the tension in his arm, the coiled control of a man who was not remotely thrown by what had just happened, which meant he understood exactly what she'd done and why. "They were going to hurt you," she said quietly, maintaining the pleasant fiction of a couple dancing. "The one on your right had something in his jacket. I saw your hand go to your thigh." "I noticed," he said. "You were just going to sit there." "I was handling it." "With what, the cocktail napkins?" Something shifted in his expression, the faintest ghost of a reaction there and gone. "You're either very brave or very stupid." "Third option," Celeste said. "I'm a nursing student who's worked a lot of Saturday nights in a trauma hour, and I've run out of the capacity to watch people get hurt when I can do something about it." He looked at her for a long moment. The quartet shifted into something slower. "What's your name?" "Celeste." "Celeste." He said it the way you test the weight of something. "I need you to smile at me like you mean it. They're still watching." She smiled. It took effort. "And then I'm going to go back to my shift, and you're going to leave through the front, and we're both going to pretend this didn't happen." "That's a reasonable plan," he said. "Unfortunately, it won't work." Before she could ask what he meant, the lights in the hall flickered. A half-second of darkness, so brief most of the donors didn't register it. In that half-second, the man pulled her sharply sideways, and Celeste heard a muffled crack from somewhere near the east exit that was not a champagne cork. Someone screamed. The hall erupted. He had her by the wrist and was moving through the panicking crowd with controlled efficiency, not fighting the chaos but riding it, using the bodies in streaming toward the exits as cover. They weren't going toward the main doors. They were going through the gallery, deeper into the museum. "Where are we going?" she managed. "Freight elevator, loading dock. My people are already outside." His people? Who are you? He didn't answer. They hit the freight elevator at the back of the contemporary wing. He shouldered the door open and pulled her inside. The doors closed. In the sudden silence and yellow industrial light, Celeste finally got a good look at his face, and the thing she'd missed from across the hall was the scar that ran from his left temple to the corner of his jaw, thin and white and old. "Kieran isn't your name, is it?" she said. It wasn't a question. "No," he straightened his jacket, but it wasn't a bad choice. The elevator opened to a loading bay filled with catering equipment. 2 black Chevy Suburbans were already idling at the dock, their drivers standing alert in matching dark wool overcoats. A third man, shorter, wire-built, with a broken nose badly set, crossed to them immediately. Mr. Ashby. The man's eyes cut to Celeste and stayed there, assessing. The Halcons had a second team at the south exit. Vehicles are clean and hot. Mr. Ashby. Celeste stood very still. She knew that name. She'd grown up in Pilsen. Her neighbors had known that name. The Ashby family had controlled Chicago's port infrastructure for 30 years, the kind of control that didn't get written about in the Tribune, but that everyone who worked the docks understood. The kind of family whose name, when it came up in conversation, made people lower their voices. Kieran Ashby wasn't a man who'd gotten in over his head with a loan shark. Kieran Ashby was the reason the loan sharks had someone to answer to. "I need to go home," Celeste said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I live in Pilsen. I have an 8 a.m. clinical tomorrow." Ashby looked at her with eyes that were direct and unsparing. "The men in that hall tonight came from Sinaloa 3 days ago, specifically for me. Every camera in that museum captured you pulling me onto the dance floor. By morning, they'll have your face. And because you touched me in public, they'll assume you're someone I care about." The word care sat in the air between them with complicated weight. "I don't know you," Celeste said. "They don't know that." He moved toward the first SUV and held the rear door open. It wasn't an invitation. It was an equation. "If you go home tonight, you'll be alone in your apartment, and they will come." He held her gaze. or you come with me and you're protected." Celeste looked at the open door. She looked at the loading dock, at the city night beyond the bay entrance, at the ordinary world she'd been standing inside 4 hours ago. She got in the car. They were on I-90 heading northwest when the night detonated. The sound hit first, a deep percussive crack from ahead, the kind of concussion that went through the floor of the vehicle and into your teeth. The lead SUV lurched violently sideways, its right front tire shredded by a spike strip laid across the highway, and it scraped the concrete barrier in a shower of sparks before grinding to a halt. "Go around it! Push through," the driver barked into the radio. Ashby already had a weapon drawn. He pushed Celeste low in the seat without asking, his body between her and the windows, and she heard gunfire, short, controlled bursts from somewhere in the tree line above the embankment. The rear window webbed under impact but held, ballistic glass. They broke through in 40 seconds. The third vehicle laid suppressive fire on the ridge while the convoy accelerated into the darkness. Celeste kept her head down and counted her own heartbeats because it was the only thing she could control. When she finally sat up, she saw the man in the front passenger seat. His name was Tomas. Right now he was slumped against the door, his left hand pressed to his neck, blood seeping steadily through his fingers. A fragment from the window seal, driven inward by the impact force, had opened the external jugular, not immediately fatal, but working on it. Celeste moved without thinking. She was over the center console and had her hands on Tomas's neck before anyone in the vehicle processed what she was doing. She felt the pulse, too fast, thready, assessed the blood flow, and made the calculation the way her trauma instructor had drilled into her. External jugular laceration, venous not arterial, direct pressure can hold it, but she needed to pack the wound. "Give me your pocket square," she said to Ashby. Her voice went clinical. In the ER, your voice went calm. "Or you went home now and I need whatever first aid kit is in this vehicle." Ashby pulled the white silk square from his breast pocket without a word. The driver popped the center console. Celeste took the pocket square, folded it to create density, and pressed it directly to Tomas's neck while she talked the man through slowing his breathing. Slower breathing meant lower heart rate, meant less pressure on the vessel. "He needs a hospital," she said. 30 minutes to the estate," Ashby said from very close behind her. She could feel the tension in him. Not panic, but something more controlled and more terrifying. The thing that people who are rarely scared feel when they finally are. "There's a medical suite. His venous pressure is going to." "Celeste," his voice was quiet. "Can you keep him alive for 30 minutes? She looked at Tomas. She looked at the blood soaking through the silk, the rate of it, the color of it. She looked at the bag in the console, wound packing gauze, an IV kit, a blood pressure cuff. Someone had stocked this vehicle like a field kit for exactly this kind of night. "Yes," she said, "but I need you to hold this pressure point here." She guided Ashby's fingers to the precise spot just above Tomas's clavicle. "And you do not move them. Not for anything. Do you understand?" "I understand," he said. He held the pressure point. Celeste worked. She started an IV line in Tomas's right arm while maintaining pressure on the wound packing. She talked to Tomas continuously. His name, the car, the night, what she was doing and why. Because unconscious patients who could still hear sometimes came back from further than the monitors suggested, and she was not ready to lose him. The convoy drove. Ashby didn't speak. He did exactly what she told him, for 31 minutes in the dark. The Ashby estate outside Barrington was stone gates and a long private drive through old hardwood trees, and the medical suite inside was more private clinic than anything residential. 2 people were already waiting. A physician who introduced himself only as Dr. Wren, and a nurse named Breckenridge, who moved with the economy of someone who'd done this before, under circumstances that probably hadn't made it into any insurance paperwork. Celeste gave them the handoff the way she'd learned in clinical. Time, mechanism, interventions, current vitals. Dr. Wren listened without interrupting and nodded once. Good work, he said simply, and took over. Celeste walked back into the hallway on legs that had started to shake, now that there was nothing left to hold them steady. She found a wall and leaned against it, and closed her eyes, and tried to remember how breathing worked. She heard footsteps. She knew without opening her eyes who it was. He's going to be all right, Ashby said. Not a question. Dr. Wren is good, and we moved fast enough. She opened her eyes. He was standing a few feet away, jacket off, his shirt carrying the evidence of the last 2 hours. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, something stripped of its armor, raw and precise. You didn't have to do any of that, he said quietly. The dancing? She heard herself almost laugh, hollow and exhausted. The IV line? The 31 minutes of keeping a man's blood inside him? You're right, I could have gone home. Why didn't you? Celeste thought about her mother, about the nurses at Rush University Medical Center who'd stayed late, who'd explained things slowly, who'd made the difference in rooms that smelled like antiseptic and fear, about the thing that had propelled her into nursing in the first place. That the gap between a person's surviving and not surviving was sometimes just whether someone with the right skills happened to be standing in the right place at the right moment. Because I knew how, she said. That's the only reason anyone ever needs. Ashby looked at her for a long time. Somewhere in the wing behind them, a monitor beeped in its steady rhythm. Thomas, alive, holding. Los Halcons won't stop, he said. The footage from tonight is already out. They know your face. They know you were with me. He stepped closer, and Celeste held her ground the way she'd learned to hold her ground in rooms where people were dying and panicking, and no one else was keeping it together. Until this is resolved, and I will resolve it, you're not safe anywhere in this city. So what does that mean? She asked. Kieran Ashby's dark eyes didn't waver. There was no pretense in them, no softness, but there was something else. Something that looked like a man who'd spent a long time surrounded by people who obeyed him, encountering for the first time someone he couldn't simply command. It means you stay here, he said, under my protection, until I've dismantled every piece of the network that's coming for you. He paused. I don't make promises I don't intend to keep, Celeste. That one I will. She looked at him, at the scar, at the dark eyes, at the perfectly controlled stillness of a man who ran a city's shadow infrastructure and had just spent 31 minutes doing exactly what a nursing student told him to do without flinching once. I have a clinical rotation at 8 a.m., she said. We'll handle it. You can't reschedule Northwestern. I own 3 buildings on Northwestern's campus, he said, with the absolute absence of inflection that was the most frightening thing she'd heard all night. I'll make a call. Celeste breathed in, she breathed out. In the wing behind her, Thomas's monitor kept its steady rhythm. Proof that her hands had been enough, that knowing the right thing and doing it had mattered. She was exhausted and blood-stained and standing in the house of a man who controlled things she'd been taught her whole life to stay away from. And she'd been placed here by a single moment of instinct in a marble hall, when she'd looked at a stranger across a crowded room and seen someone who needed help and moved toward him without asking herself the cost. She hadn't known the cost then. She was beginning to understand it now. One condition, Celeste said. His eyes didn't move. Name it. Thomas sees a vascular surgery specialist in the morning. Fragment injuries near the jugular need imaging. I'm guessing your estate doesn't have. Something passed through Kieran Ashby's expression. Brief, unreadable, almost disarming. The closest thing to surprised she'd seen on a face built to reveal nothing. Agreed, he said. She nodded once, looked back at the door to the medical wing, and thought about her mother, who'd crossed a border at 22 with nothing, and built a life from the sheer refusal to accept that circumstances were permanent. Who used to sit with her on the Pilsen fire escape on summer nights and say, Misha, the world is going to ask you to be smaller than you are. Don't let it. She hadn't, not tonight. Then we should check on him, Celeste said, and walked back through the door. Kieran Ashby followed without being asked. And somewhere in the city behind them, on the rain-wet screens of a dozen surveillance feeds, the footage was already running. A woman in a black uniform shirt pulling a dangerous man to safety, her face clear and unafraid, her grip on his arm absolute. She hadn't wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. She had stepped, deliberately and without hesitation, into the only place where her particular combination of skills and stubbornness could have mattered. And the man who owned half the city's shadows had watched it happen and understood, with the cold certainty of someone who'd built an empire on reading people correctly, that he was not going to let her walk back out.